Good evening. This is James Exum coming to you once again from my studio in South Austin, Texas. It's going on about 8:55 in the evening, and this is, as I said, um, coming to you from my studio. I like to produce from my studio because it's comfortable and I know where everything is, and it's easy to sort out and easy to arrange and easy to prep for these videos. I've lived here about 10 years, and as you can see from the background, I'm very comfortable in my, I used to tell friends this is my little hobbit hole, a little hobbit house, hobbit hole, whatever. I was always fascinated as a child by Bilbo Baggins, and yes, Bilbo Baggins was already in print when I was a young lad. I think I discovered him at the age of 12 or so, when I was in the 7th grade at Core Elementary in Charleston, South Carolina, before I came to Texas and served in the military for 4 years. So I am a veteran, and I am retired, and I am about to become 76 years old, and I am a practicing yogi as a writer, as a researcher, as a videographer, and so forth. This will be a long video. I think it's around 10 pages. The script, so to speak, for my videos generally run somewhere around 5 pages, and those usually are done by, say by 10 to 20 minutes. This one might run 20 to 30 minutes. We'll see as it goes. You can stop it at your leisure and restart it to finish it if you like. All of these things, of course, are up to you. I hope you enjoy it. It's on a very controversial subject: war as a marketplace. Now that is controversial to me. And here, let me make sure I have it properly titled before I try to save it in my as a recording project. So I think that's enough about me and enough as a preliminary intro to you. So let's go right to it. I'll allow my word program to read it to you because I suffer from a Parkinsonian disease that is slowly but surely affecting my vocal cords, where I have to take a break quite often from speaking and drink plenty of liquids and sort of boiling the throat, so to speak. That's a poor joke, and I'm an old punster, so I apologize for that. Well, let's go and see what you can learn from this. If you agree with it, that's fine. If you don't agree with it, that's fine. This is still America, and we still have freedom of speech, and hopefully the Constitution will maintain its integrity. Here we go.
War as a Marketplace. James H. Exum / Yogi Sakshi. Austin, Texas. Copyrighted August 8, 2026. All rights reserved. When conflicts arrive, enemies become convenient. Profit hides under urgency. So before the mind rushes forward, ask the first clear question. Who benefits when the collective nervous system is kept afraid? Who sells the shield? Who pulls the alarm? Who counts the profits of war while the public counts the dead? Yogi Sakshi. When the future of suffering becomes a tradable signal, the market is no longer merely reacting to war. It is aligned with war, feeding on its uncertainty, and teaching the world to confuse prediction with wisdom. Yogi Sakshi. This essay examines monetized conflict and the political economy of anxiety. War is often introduced through the language of necessity: territory, security, deterrence, revenge, ideology, and survival. Those explanations can be real. They should not be dismissed lightly. But beneath them lies another structure, less visible and often less accountable. Weapons must be manufactured. Contracts must be renewed. Supply chains must be protected. Reconstruction must be financed. Fear becomes demand, and destruction becomes opportunity. In that deeper sense, war can become a marketplace, one in which public alarm is converted into private revenue, and urgency becomes the atmosphere in which difficult questions are postponed. The machinery of incentive. The first distinction must be made with care. Defense is not, by itself, a moral failure. A government has a duty to protect its people, and a serious nation cannot afford naivete about danger. The problem begins when preparedness hardens into permanence, when the machinery built to protect the public develops incentives of its own, and when the question shifts from what safety requires to what the system can justify. Industry profits from production. Policy gains momentum through fear. Media gains attention through alarm. Finance gains movement through instability. Each institution may insist, with some justification, that its role is necessary. And sometimes necessity is real. But when every incentive bends toward escalation, restraint becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a civic discipline. Historical origins of the military-industrial complex. The phrase military-industrial complex entered American political vocabulary through President Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell address of January 17, 1961. The warning carried unusual weight because it came from a leader who was not hostile to military preparedness. Eisenhower had commanded Allied forces in Europe during the Second World War and then governed during the early Cold War. He understood the need for strength, but he also understood that strength, if left unexamined, could become an institution with habits, interests, and appetites of its own. Eisenhower's concern was not that defense industry existed. His concern was that a permanent military establishment, joined to a permanent armaments industry, could acquire influence beyond ordinary democratic scrutiny. The danger, in other words, was not merely the size of the budget. It was the possibility that policy itself could be shaped by those who benefited from sustained threat, accelerated procurement, and a politics of permanent readiness. The historical setting is essential. Before the Second World War, the United States tended to mobilize for war and then demobilize afterward. After 1945, the Cold War changed that pattern. Nuclear deterrence, the Korean War, NATO, intelligence expansion, and federally funded research turned defense readiness from an emergency measure into a permanent architecture. The democratic challenge that followed remains with us. How can a republic maintain necessary defense without allowing defense institutions, contractors, lobbyists, laboratories, and procurement systems to exercise disproportionate power over national purpose? Contemporary data and institutional scale. Contemporary data suggests that Eisenhower's warning remains a structural question, not a relic of Cold War rhetoric. Congressional Research Service reporting on Department of Defense contractors states that in fiscal year 2024, the department obligated approximately $445.1 billion in contract spending with 5 firms: Lockheed Martin, RTX, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, receiving about 30% of those obligations. That concentration does not, by itself, prove misconduct, but it does show how national security, industrial capacity, congressional appropriations, and corporate revenue can become deeply interdependent. The scholarly question, then, is not whether a modern state should possess military capacity. It is whether the institutions that supply that capacity can be governed transparently, audited rigorously, and restrained politically. A defense sector of this scale demands scrutiny because errors, overpayments, revolving door incentives, emergency waivers, and classified justifications can operate in spaces where public visibility is limited. In democratic theory, the issue is accountability. In political economy, the issue is incentives. In moral language, the issue is whether security becomes inseparable from profit. The exploitation of a nation. A nation exists for its people. That proposition sounds simple, but it is often where the argument must begin. When the public is steady, democracy can deliberate. When the public is agitated, democracy reacts, and reaction can be profitable. A fearful society may accept surveillance, debt, emergency powers, permanent mobilization, and inflated procurement as if they were ordinary civic conditions rather than extraordinary measures requiring extraordinary justification. This is the economy of agitation. It is not only the sale of weapons, it is the sale of a condition, chronic vigilance, chronic suspicion, chronic readiness to strike. Over time, peace begins to feel unfamiliar, silence begins to feel unsafe, and institutions forget how to operate without conflict as their organizing premise. The forecast as a weapon. Then there is another layer. Not the factory, not the battlefield. The forecast, the prediction of escalation, the rumor of peace, the whisper of a ceasefire, the probability of a strike before the weekend. In this layer, conflict becomes information and information becomes position. Markets move before armies move. Prices tremble before missiles fly. Someone studies the pattern, reads the tension, watches the border, watches the language of leaders, watches the supply of oil, grain, weapons, shipping lanes, insurance, currency, and fear. Then they place the bet. They do not need to fire the weapon. They only need to forecast the results. This is profit by anticipation. Profit from the chance of attack. Profit from the chance of peace. Profit from peace delayed by one day, or war extended by 1 week, or a ceasefire announced after the market has already absorbed the rumor. In this economy, even uncertainty has a price. Even silence has a price. Even the pause before violence can be traded. So ask again, who knows first? Who speaks first? Who leaks? Who delays? Who benefits from the forecast becoming real? And who benefits from the forecast remaining only a forecast? When the future of suffering becomes a tradable signal, the market is no longer merely reacting to war. It is aligned with war, feeding on its uncertainty, and teaching the world to confuse prediction with wisdom. The agencies of privileged signal. Now imagine the danger when public power sits close to private appetite. The president's office hears one kind of signal. The cabinet hears another. Defense, state, treasury, energy, commerce, homeland security, intelligence, emergency management, trade, ports, aviation, agriculture, cyber, and procurement agencies each touch a different nerve of the national body. One agency may know where ships will be redirected. Another may know where fuel pressure is rising. Another may know when sanctions are coming, when contracts are opening, when airspace may close, when grain routes may tighten, when rare minerals may surge, when insurance risk may jump, when reconstruction money may flow. None of this needs to be shouted. A signal can be sold quietly. A forecast can be packaged openly. A client can receive tomorrow's tremor today. That is the corruption risk, not only a bribe in a back room, but a marketplace of privileged timing. If those near power convert early knowledge into advantage, if agencies become sources of tradable expectation, if public information is delayed while private clients are prepared, then democracy is no longer breathing evenly. The public receives the impact. The connected receive the signal. So ask it plainly, and ask it before the documents are sealed. Who knew before the market moved? Which office heard the warning? Which agency held the data? Which contractor was positioned? Which fund was ready? Which client was told to wait, buy, sell, hedge, insure, ship, store, or short? In a healthy republic, public power must not become a private forecast desk. The Pentagon Ledger. Now bring the gaze to the Pentagon Ledger. Not the slogan, the ledger. War spins in layers. Operations, deployments, fuel, transport, maintenance, contractor support, emergency procurement, intelligence, medical care, replacement parts, munitions, and the long tail of veterans care. A missile fired today is not only a flash in the sky. It is a contract line, a production slot, a logistics chain, a replacement request, and a future appropriation. Look at replenishment. The Government Accountability Office reported that Congress provided the Department of Defense $25.9 billion in supplemental funding to replace weapons transferred from U.S. stockpiles to Ukraine, with more than $18 billion obligated by the end of 2023 in ammunition, missiles, and combat vehicles accounting for most of those obligations. It also noted that the department requested another $18 billion, and that Congress later provided about $13.4 billion more that could be used for replacement. So the battlefield does not end at the battlefield. It returns as inventory math. And the timeline is not a switch. GAO described long-standing supply chain challenges worsened by war demand, including missile electronic parts whose lead times increased from 19 months to 34 months. Independent defense analysis has warned that some key missile inventories can take several years to replace, while other systems may take months to a year depending on production capacity. So one day of firing can echo for years in the factory. This is where money asks to grow. Annual defense requests rise not only because of visible wars, but because of restocking, deterrence, industrial base expansion, readiness, modernization, inflation, and the fear of the next theater. Congressional Budget Office analysis of the 2026 request described a Department of Defense budget request totaling $961 billion, including $113 billion from reconciliation funding, and said that, adjusted for inflation, it was among the largest requests in 50 years. When the request rises, the room for weak oversight rises with it. Now speak carefully. Embezzlement is not proven by a large budget. Waste is not the same as theft. A failed audit is not itself a conviction, but weak controls create openings. The Pentagon has repeatedly struggled to achieve a clean department-wide audit, and oversight reports have identified material weaknesses, outdated systems, incomplete records, and asset accountability problems. In such fog, money can leak through overbilling, phantom deliverables, inflated change orders, duplicate payments, cost-plus incentives, sole source contracts, consulting pass-throughs, emergency waivers, and end-of-year spending pressure. So ask the hard questions in public rhythm. Who priced the replacement? Who verified the delivery? Who inspected the inventory? Who approved the waiver? Who benefited from the urgency? Who turned a temporary emergency into a permanent account? When war spending moves faster than accountability, the danger is not only that money is wasted. The danger is that the public loses the ability to know where the money went. The antidote is not paralysis. It is clean tracking, independent audit, public reporting, inventory visibility, contract transparency, real penalties for false billing, protection for inspectors and whistleblowers, clear separation between agencies, contractors, political offices, and market actors. If a nation must restock, let it restock with open books. If it must defend itself, let it defend itself without turning confusion into cover. The war that refuses to end. Now ask the question nobody wants to ask early enough. How long can a war last when the incentives learn how to survive the war itself? History gives a sober answer. The post 9-11 wars show that conflicts can continue not for months, but for decades, with missions renamed, theaters shifted, troops reduced, contractors retained, and emergency accounts folded into ordinary expectation. Brown University's costs of war project estimated that 2 decades of post 9/11 wars cost the United States about $8 trillion when direct war costs, veterans care, homeland security, interest, and related expenses are counted. So when a conflict becomes open-ended, the price does not merely rise, it compounds. A limited strike may be priced in days. A regional operation may be priced in months. But a war economy is priced in years, replenishment cycles, replacement contracts, base operations, contractor support, intelligence expansion, refugee support, reconstruction promises, veterans health care, interest on borrowed money, and modernization justified by lessons learned. If the annual defense request stands near the $1 trillion range, then every year of extended crisis becomes a year in which ordinary oversight must keep pace with extraordinary spending. If it cannot, the fog becomes expensive. Now I speak prudently. A large war budget does not prove corruption. An administration does not become guilty because the numbers are large. But if public officials treated war appropriations like a private treasure chest, the pathways would be visible. Friendly firms could receive accelerated contracts. Donors could become vendors. Shell subcontractors could hide markups. Consulting layers could drain funds before work is done. Emergency waivers could bypass competition. Classified programs could narrow scrutiny. Insider timing could guide investments. Delayed audits could allow the story to harden before the books are opened. And this is why duration matters. The longer the war, the more normal the emergency becomes. The more normal the emergency becomes, the easier it is to say, not now, to oversight. Not now, the troops need it. Not now, the enemy is watching. Not now, the contract is urgent. Not now, the audit can wait. But a republic cannot wait forever to count its money. If it does, the books become a battlefield too. So measure the warning signs. Repeated emergency supplementals. No clearance date. Contractors paid faster than results are verified. Production delays rewarded with larger awards. Officials leaving office for firms they once oversaw. Market actors positioned before public announcements. Classified justifications used too broadly. Audits postponed, narrowed, or ignored. These are not proof by themselves. They are smoke. And where public money burns behind closed doors, smoke must be investigated before it becomes a permanent weather system. The children's ledger. Now turn the ledger around. Ask not only what were costs, but what the same money could cultivate if it were not consumed by fire. $1 billion is not an abstraction when placed in the hands of children. It becomes clinics. It becomes school nurses. It becomes mental health care. It becomes clean water in old pipes, food on empty tables, beds under roofs, medicine before crisis, and stability before despair. Look at the scale. A defense request of nearly $1 trillion is not simply a military number. It is a moral comparison. The Congressional Budget Office described the 2026 Department of Defense request as $961 billion, including $113 billion in reconciliation funding. Head Start's fiscal year 2024 federal funding was about $12.27 billion, serving more than 715,000 children, pregnant women, and families. Put those figures beside each other and feel the imbalance in the body. One ledger builds weapons for possible wars. Another builds language, health, nutrition, and early learning for actual children. What could redirected money do? It could expand pediatric care. It could cover preventive health screenings. It could fund addiction treatment, trauma counseling, disability services, rural clinics, maternal care, dental care, and mobile health units. It could strengthen SNAP, WIC, school breakfast, school lunch, and summer meals so that hunger is not treated as a character flaw, but as a solvable failure of distribution. It could build and repair housing, not talking points. Housing, units with heat, units without mold, units near schools, transit, clinics, and work. It could reduce homelessness, support rental assistance, repair public housing, open shelters that are not warehouses of suffering, and give families the one medicine policy often forgets: a stable place to sleep. It could support childcare and early education, pay teachers, keep libraries open, modernize classrooms, fund after-school programs, protect children from heat, pollution, lead, and violence, and give parents time to work without choosing between rent and supervision. Social services are not charity when they prevent collapse. They are infrastructure for human stability. So ask it in the performance of public conscience. How many meals are inside one missile? How many clinic visits are inside one failed audit? How many homes are inside one cost overrun? How many teachers are inside one emergency contract? How many children could breathe easier if the country measured security not only by what it can destroy, but by what it refuses to neglect? This is the final balance. Children are not future citizens only. They are citizens now. The hungry are not future statistics only. They are bodies now. The unhoused are not future policy debates only. They are people now. If war spending can be mobilized overnight, then care can be mobilized with the same urgency. If the nation can find money to refill arsenals, it can find money to refill refrigerators. If it can rebuild what bombs destroy, it can repair what poverty has been destroying all along. The inner technology of war. War is prepared inside perception before it is carried out in the world. First, the other side is flattened. Then complexity is removed. Then memory is edited. Then pain is ranked. Once the mind accepts a simplified enemy, the market can move quickly. It is easier to fund destruction when we have stopped feeling the full humanity of those who will receive it. This is why inner discipline matters in public life. A calm mind is harder to manipulate. A steady population is harder to stampede. A citizen who can pause before reacting is less useful to those who profit from panic. Attention is political. Breath is political. A nervous system that is not governed from within can be governed from the outside. Ahimsa as public intelligence. Now bring in the old yogic wisdom, not as decoration, but as a technology of seeing. Ahimsa means non-harm, but non-harm is not weakness. Non-harm is precision. It is the discipline of asking, what harm is hidden inside this policy? What harm is delayed inside this contract? What harm is exported so another population must carry it? What harm returns home through debt, trauma, hunger, neglect, and mistrust? Ahimsa is not passive. It does not say, do nothing while violence grows. It says, see clearly before you act. Do not let fear drive the hand. Do not let greed disguise itself as duty. Do not let the language of protection become permission for permanent harm. In this sense, ahimsa is public intelligence. It is the calm mind applied to budgets, borders, agencies, markets, contracts, and command rooms. Yoga teaches that disturbance begins inside before it becomes action outside. A nation also has vrittis, waves of fear, anger, pride, memory, humiliation, appetite. If leaders, markets, and media learn to stir those waves, then the people can be moved without being awakened. The work is to still the wave long enough to see who is steering it. So ahimsa asks for alignment. Let defense be accountable. Let force be reluctant. Let money be traceable. Let speech be honest. Let the children be counted before the missiles. Let the hungry be counted before the contractors. Let the wounded be counted before the forecasts. If harm must be prevented, prevent it with the least harm possible. If security must be built, build it without making violence the center of national imagination. A call to clarity. So the questions must be asked before escalation, not after, while the drums are still being tuned, not after the march has begun. Who profits? Who votes? Who bleeds? Who borrows? Who rebuilds? Who returns changed? And who, finally, does not return at all? Transparency is clarity in action. Accountability is not a burden on democracy. It is the posture by which democracy stands upright. Restraint is not weakness. It is the measure of strategic maturity. Ahimsa, understood publicly, is not retreat from responsibility. It is the discipline of seeing harm before it is multiplied, of counting people before profits, and of refusing to let fear do the work that conscience and judgment must do. If war becomes a product, peace becomes competition. If fear becomes currency, clarity becomes resistance. The task, then, is both civic and inward. Steady the breath, study the incentive, refuse the trance, and practice ahimsa not only in private conduct but in public accounting. A mature republic must defend itself when defense is necessary, but it must also defend its moral imagination from the machinery that would teach the human heart to confuse profit with necessity.
The machinery that would teach the human heart to confuse profit with necessity. You know, I'll tell you something very private. Sometimes when I hear my work read and think back on all the research I put into that work, I'm amazed that it is produced and it hits the target so strongly, so perfectly in certain phrases I conjure up. The concept is the key thing in writing. First, you have to have the imagination or the luck, sometimes it's luck, to run across a topic that is timely and of great importance to the American public. This is one of those. Again, it's very lengthy. It seems like the time on this, as I predicted earlier, is around 30 minutes. Right now, I'm at 33 minutes with the closing uh, speech I'm giving you, closing information I'm giving you, personal information. But that does not make it less important. You can speak for 3 hours and say nothing. You can speak for 30 minutes and say a small amount, a large amount of very important data. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, I think I heard once, maybe in the seventh grade, the first time I heard it read, that was less than 10 minutes. In fact, it was so quick that some of the reporters that traveled there to record it were barely able to get set up and in place, and their cameras with their cameramen, and yes, they had cameramen in those days, before it was over. This one is a bit longer than that, about 3 times, but I will assure you it's chock full of what I consider truth and wisdom and ideas that can be converted into workable projects to aid the American public. Too long, my friends, have we allowed men in Washington that have been there for 20, 30 years, into their dotage even, and those that do what they call the revolving door, leave Congress and go to work for the companies that used to come and uh, not bribe them, but donate money to them to get reelected. And so that's the revolving door. But here's another thing. The end of the revolving door is those men that want to receive funds from private entities, go to work for those entities, and uh, become people that go back onto the floor of Congress and influence other congressmen they just left working with. These are the people that uh, influence Washington behind the scenes. I'm not saying that's not fair or legal or any of that. I'm not saying anything of that nature, and I'm not saying war is bad. I'm saying listen to my argument. And if you can find one teeny bit of workable truth in there, then I've done my job as a researcher, a writer, and an old yogi trying to influence the world to return to a better place. Thank you so much for listening. And as I always say, be good to yourself, be good to others, and be good to strangers. And remember all the maladies of the world that come and go, in which we're participating right now. The major problems you face every day socially and personally, economically, these too shall pass. Thank you and good night.